Hello, and welcome to the portion of the program where we're talking to folks who are maybe new in the field or are finishing up their training and education in anticipation of going into the field. My hope is that you're making some big investments in yourself as you make this transition, and that you're seeking out some mentors, some people who have experience, and ideally, perhaps the best kind of wisdom is from learning from other people's mistakes. And I've made lots of them. So, one of the things that I do on the side is I work as an adjunct instructor for students who are going on to become therapists. And if you know anything about adjunct instructors, you know that they work for really a pittance, very little money. And so maybe this is something we do out of some altruistic drive, but honestly, for me, it's a chance to share all of the lessons that I wish I had had before going into the field, and to challenge a lot of the notions that people tend to have about the nature of their profession and those who practice it. So, the question that I typically ask my students who are, again, preparing to go on to work in social services is, why did you choose this profession? And the answer is almost inevitably, because I want to help people. Well, that's usually where the conversation ends. But when I'm teaching, the follow up question that I ask is why? Why do you want to help people? And that is usually met with a lot of confused expressions. And I think perhaps folks feel like it's self evident why it is that they want to help people. They associate that with being caring, compassionate people. They see it as perhaps some altruistic drive that we have. And at least in my experience and the experience of all the healers and helpers that I've supervised, that's just not the case. The desire to help others is genuine, that is earnest. The motives and the drive behind why we're compelled to work in our chosen professions, that's worth exploring. I usually explain it by telling a story about my wife. My wife is an accountant, and there's a certain amount of truth in stereotypes. So, accountants are people who work in cubicles and manage numbers, and their world is very black and white. And so, when we first got together, and she would ask me a lot of questions about my coworkers, my colleagues, friends that I was making, and she would always be asking, why are they the way they are? And I would have to say, look, when you talk to somebody in the healing and helping professions, don't ask them about their childhood. You're not likely to hear a really happy story. All of us have deeply personal reasons for choosing our vocations. And maybe you're an exception to the rule. Maybe you come from wonderfully healthy and happy people, and if so, I'm very happy for you. But my experience is you'd be in the extreme minority if that's true. The folks that I've served over the years disproportionately come from families of abuse and neglect, disproportionately come from families where addiction was present, and it just kind of makes sense to me. If you grow up taking care of others and then you go on to do it for a living, sure, that just kind of resonates. I don't know what people who have healthy, adaptive childhoods do for a living. Maybe they become architects. I don't know. But they sure as hell don't become social workers. And they very rarely become therapists or nurses or case managers. That's just not the drive. So I think most of our motives, most of our good intentions are subconsciously fueled. And of course, what we know from basic psychology is that whatever's in the subconscious can be pulled forward into consciousness. But that requires your willingness to earnestly examine yourself, your motives, and what it is that you hope to accomplish. In retrospect, I can tell you that what I most hoped for was that if I facilitated the healing of others, that it would heal me, that it would take away my past pain, that it would somehow magically result in the broken pieces of me just fitting together perfectly. And of course, that isn't true. Healing is a selfish act. It has to be. But we have a connotation in which we see being selfish as being unkind. And that's simply not the case. If you grew up the way I did, then taking care of yourself and making your needs a priority feels selfish, but it's not. In fact, it's necessary. If we're going to do good work in the field and we're going to have a career that is relatively manageable and sustainable, then taking care of ourselves is not something that's optional. It's something that's mandatory. And it requires a lot of really great self-care. And we're going to talk about that through this series. And by all means, I really welcome your input and your questions. counseling@roadrunner.com. Let's talk about what it is that you're experiencing, what it is you're anticipating, and how it is that you're going to maintain good health holistically as you do that.